Okay, hello everybody. My name is Tom again. I'm coming to you here from Cheehaw Park and Zoo, and I'm so excited to be joined by all of you for another session of Animal ABCs. So today, the group of animals we are going to focus on is a really cool one. It is our birds. So we are going to talk about common characteristics of birds, what makes a bird, and we are going to talk about cool traits that they have and how we can recognize that we have a bird. And then we are going to look at some really cool examples to learn a lot more about birds and the different environments they're found in and how they survive in those different environments. Okay, so I figured we could just start with talking about what makes a bird a bird. So the first couple of things I want to mention is that similar to us mammals, they are also warm-blooded, which means they are able to make their own body heat. They can keep themselves warm, but that means they also need to be eating so that they can have enough energy to keep themselves warm. So unlike animals like reptiles and amphibians that rely on the sun and environmental temperatures to stay warm, they are able to keep themselves warm. Another kind of cool thing about birds is that they have, sorry about that, they have a skeleton. So what I have here is the skeleton. Oh, let's see if I can get good lighting. That looks pretty good. They have a skeleton. So this is the skeleton of a pigeon. Let's see if I can find better lighting. Oh, it's kind of hard to see with the light above. But what you'll see is that they have all their features in their skeleton. So they have their beak moving into their head, and then you can see where their wings are. Let's see, it's really bright. But you can see where they have their wings. And then they have really what I want you to see down here is a super enlarged chest bone here. And that's going to be super important. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we're going to talk about other features that you can see in the skeleton that are really important for the bird. I wish it wasn't so washed out, but you can see it's really cool that they have that skeleton. And then something else that we think about oftentimes when we think about birds is we think about their eggs. So birds lay hard-shelled eggs, and they are really special eggs because of that hard shell, that they can do a number of different things that are really important for birds being able to lay eggs on land. So the first is that this hard shell is going to provide a bit of protection, which is nice, but also it can keep water in the eggs so that they don't have to worry about losing water or even having water or their eggs being laid in the water. So this is why we oftentimes see birds making nests, right? So we know a lot of birds will collect materials and make nests to lay their eggs in. That can be in the tree. Some birds will even lay their nests, make nests right on the ground and lay their eggs on the ground in those nests. But either way, those are all out of the water. So having an egg like this can allow them to keep water in their eggs and keep the young, the little chicks, the little baby birds in the eggs nice and hydrated, so they don't have to worry about losing water. And they can also even let air in and out of the egg. So even though it's a hard shell, they're pretty good at letting air flow through so that there is oxygen available to the little chicks that are developing in these eggs. So pretty cool. They do have to be cared for by the mothers oftentimes. So that's why you will see birds staying by the nest. They're going to care for the young. But then what's really cool about birds is that sometimes on the edge of their beaks, they will have a little tooth that they use to crack out of the eggs when they're ready to become chicks. So really cool eggs. They also have a food source in them so that there's even food available to the really young birds in these eggs while they're growing and developing. So not only can they hold water, but they also have food. So those little chicks in the eggs have all the resources they need to start growing and developing until they are able to hatch out. So you can see this is a really big egg. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this later when we look at one of our different birds that we're going to talk about. All right. So let's move into what we really think about a lot of times when we think about birds. We think about wings, right? So we know that birds have wings, and those wings are comprised of feathers. So this is a characteristic of birds. And so we're going to talk about all the different things that wings and feathers can do for birds. So the first, when we think about wings, we think about flight, right? Birds are able to fly. That's why we find them in the air, flying around, going from trees to the ground and over above us in the air. And we can see lots of birds even making really long distance flights. And that's because they have wings that are really good at helping them fly. So, what birds are doing is they are using these wings to help them push air behind them and get up into the air. So they flap their wings, right? So you can see that these wings, they can be pretty large depending on what the bird is, but you can see how much area they have and how much space is on those wings that's spread out. And using all of these different feathers, such as these really long ones down here on the wings, they can use those wings to flap and push a lot of air to the point where they can lift off the ground and stay up in the air. So it's really cool. It's really important. When I was showing you that skeleton earlier, I showed you the really big chest bone, and that's because they can't do all this flapping without a lot of muscle. So just like we have muscles, birds also have muscles, especially attached to their wings and that chest bone, that allows them to be able to flap. Because if you think about it, that's one of the best ways some birds can get around is through flapping their wings and flying through the air. So they want to have lots of opportunity to be able to flap and push that air behind them and stay up in the air. So you can see these wings are really cool. This is the side that would be attached to the bird, and then this is what they would use to fly. Okay, so, but that's not the only thing that feathers can do. Feathers can play a number of other important roles for birds. So another one is feathers can be coated with kind of like a waxy material, and what it'll do is it'll allow water to run right off the feathers. So kind of like we put on a raincoat and rain will drip right off of us. Some birds will cover their feathers with a waxy material that'll allow raindrops to just run right off. And that can be useful for them to stay dry, to stay lighter, and be found in aquatic environments like lakes or ponds without getting super wet and soaked and having all that water stick to their feathers. So what I have here is the wing of a duck. And so ducks will do this. They will have these sort of, if you will, waterproof feathers that will allow water to run off of them. So that can be really cool. Another thing that feathers can do is they can be used for warmth. So we have hair, a lot of mammals have fur and hair that's found all over their bodies, right? So our dogs and cats are covered in hair, and that helps keep them warm. But birds have feathers, right? So some feathers are actually used for keeping them warm. And that's going to be our feathers, such as these ones. These more fluffy looking feathers, the softer looking ones, they're not as big as some of these really big flight feathers that we see. So they're going to be feathers that are smaller, softer, and they're going to be found closer to the body. We may not even really see them all the time when we look at birds because they're going to be closer to the body, and they're going to be found underneath their wings and under those flight feathers and things like that. But they are really important, these soft feathers, for keeping the animal warm because, like I mentioned, they're warm-blooded, right? So they have to put energy into keeping themselves warm. And so this is kind of like them putting on their coat that they need to for staying warm. All right. So we know feathers can be used for flight, for staying dry, for staying warm. But another big thing that birds use feathers for is for kind of looking cool. So what I have here is a peacock feather, and you can tell it is really, really pretty, right? This is a really pretty feather, and so the males will have these feathers with these really cool color patterns, and that's because they want to look cool and nice for the female birds that they are trying to impress. So there can be a lot of cool color patterns. And not only are they trying to impress other birds and look pretty and cool, like this peacock, but going back to this owl feather that or wing that I was showing you, a lot of birds will have color patterns on their feathers. And so colors cannot even just look cool, but they can help them blend in with their environment. They can help them hide. And so animals can look really similar to their environment if they blend in really well. So these feathers of an owl can be used to help hide against trees and look the same as the bark on trees. And so if you're looking at a tree, you may actually even be looking at an owl too, and you wouldn't even notice it because it blends in so well. And so feathers can be really nice for that as well, for hiding in their environment. But then, you know, there's a lot of different color patterns found in feathers that can make them really colorful and outgoing. Okay, so lots of different things feathers can do. We know they're really important for birds, and that's a common characteristic that we can look for in birds. And, you know, they can be really important for flight, which is something a lot of birds do, but they play a lot of other important roles. So I want to talk about all of that. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about birds need to be light, right? So if they are flying as much as they are, they want to not be heavy. Because I don't know about you, but if I was a bird, I would not want to be super heavy. I would rather be lighter so that I can get up into the air easier. And so some things that they do, which is cool, a lot of the bones in birds in their skeleton have air in them. They have little spaces of air so that their bones aren't super solid. They don't want solid bones. And then also they have beaks like this that you can tell they're pointy, right? That will help birds, you know, go be able to glide into the air without a lot of air getting caught. It'll help keep them nice and straight so that when they're flying, they aren't catching a lot of air. Okay, now let's look at some differences between birds. So we know birds all have things like that beak I was just showing you, but are all bird beaks the same? I don't think so. So let's go ahead and take some look at different beaks and learn about why there may be some differences. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Let's see. Hopefully you can all see this now. So that's a really good look at, excuse me, that's a really good look at a peacock. So I was showing you that peacock feather earlier, but you can see how pretty that bird is. And even the feathers closer to the face have really nice blue. So that's what the peacock looks like, and that's where their feathers come from. And again, that's to be able to look cool for other birds that they're trying to attract. And now let's look at those beaks. So what you're going to notice is that I have 3 different birds up there, and their beaks all look very different. Now we can tell they all have beaks, but if we start on the left here with this red bird, what we're going to notice is their beak isn't that long and it's not that big. And that's because this bird is going to feed on things like seeds from plants or nuts maybe, but either way, or maybe some small insects while they're flying. But having a really short and strong beak like that, that's nice and small, is going to be useful for cracking things like seeds or nuts that they may be eating. So that vegetation, if you think about it, when we eat like a peanut, it has a crunch. So they want to have a beak that's going to help them crunch down really easily and eat those different types of plants. Now, when we look at our duck here in the middle, you can see that they have kind of a wide and longer and more spaced out beak. And that's because they are found in the water. So this bird over here that we were talking about is going to be found up in trees, kind of in environments like that. But this duck's going to be found in water, and he's going to be scooping up things from the water. So having a nice, broad and wide beak is going to be nice for being able to scoop things really easily. So if you think about it, when we use a shovel, we shovel things up with something that's a little bit wider. And so he's going to be kind of moving through the water and just scooping up things that he can. And so having a wider beak is really useful for that. So they'll eat things like plant material, maybe even some insects in the water. So having a wider beak will be easier for catching insects and not having something super small that they have to peck with more, but rather scoop. And then this last one over here, so this is definitely a water bird, but different from the duck. They are not going to be found necessarily swimming out in the open water, but they are going to be found on the edges of water. So kind of on the edge of a pond or a lake. And so, I'm showing you right now his beak, but he also has really long legs. So a lot of our birds that are found on the edges of water are going to have long legs and beaks like this. And that's so that they can stick their beak down into water and grass and vegetation and be able to pick up insects. And so having a really, narrow beak and long beak will help them with catching things in the ground. And especially if you think about it, if they're trying to catch food near the edge of water, they don't really want to stick their face in the water or their eyes, right? They want to be able to, peck things out of the water with their beak without having to stick their whole face in the water. So having long legs that will keep them raised up out of the water and allow them to move around easily in the water, but also that beak to pick things out is really nice. So like I mentioned, all of our birds have beaks, but the beaks they have are going to help them out in the environments they are found in. And that's why these three beaks look so different. And there's one other really cool beak, but I'm going to show you that one a little later when I bring out one of our special guests. Okay. And then we have different feet. So we have beaks and we have feet. So I didn't show you one of the long legs that I was talking about with that last bird, but all these legs look pretty short, but some birds do have legs that are much longer than that attached to their feet. But we see some variation, some really different feet here as well. And so up top in the middle, these orange feet, those again belong to something like our ducks. And that's important because, again, remember, those ducks are in the water and they're swimming around. So they want to have that webbing in between their toes so that they can kick water behind them. Similar to how feathers can help push air behind them, those webbed feet are going to help them paddle kind of and move water behind them as they are swimming in the water. So that's really nice for birds like ducks that are found in standing water. But then we can see things like our parakeet over here, this really green bird. And what I want you to notice is that he is holding food, that branch kind of in his hand, and then you can see it's also in his mouth. So he likely brought that food right up to his mouth using his foot. But they can also use them kind of as like hands like we can. So they have feet that are really good at functioning as hands as well and can even bring food up to their mouths. And so that's really cool. Then we have our bird in the top right here that looks like it's found on a wire. And so these are perching birds. So a lot of birds have feet that are really good for gripping on to different objects and are just used primarily, for flying and landing on a branch and being able to hold upright. And then lastly, we have these talons. So these talons look really sharp. You can see how big the nails are, and those feet are really strong. So that's going to be found on a lot of birds like our eagles, or even the bird I'm going to show you again in a little bit. But those talons are really important for predatory birds, which means they go out and they hunt things, right? And they want to try to catch animals. So I'm going to stop share really quick and show you. So I have a talon here. And so you can see how sharp those nails are and how so you can imagine that when something like an eagle catches food, like a fish, they're going to grip on and they're going to close these toes that they have right here, and they're going to grip and they're not going to let go. And so having talons like this can be really useful for birds that are hunting so that they can hold on to things and bring it back to somewhere where they can eat that is safe. So they want to, again, catch it and grip it. All right. Which is much different than those webbed feet we were looking at from the ducks, right? So big difference in birds there. And then I'm going to share my screen again. So we can see how different feet can be even between our birds, depending on what kind of food they're eating or what kind of habitat they're found in, whether it's water or on the land or in the air or in the trees. Right. Now let's talk about some of our different birds and what they have that is special that can help them be really good at being in the environments they are in. So this is a really cool bird. We actually have one of these over at Flint River Aquarium, and I wish I could show you him in person, but he's over there, and I'm here at Chehaw. But this is what we call a double-crested cormorant. Now, what I want you to notice is right off the bat, look at the feet. And so it's kind of hard to tell, but you can tell they have flat feet on those rocks, right? And if you look really closely, you can see the webbing in between the feet. Now, it's not orange like the duck. They have some black feet, but you can still see the webbing in between the feet. And that's because this is a water bird. So this bird is really good at not necessarily flying like a lot of the birds we've been talking about. We've been talking about flying a lot, right? But this bird is actually really good at diving down into the water, deep into the water. And that's because they hunt fish and they eat fish in the water. And so having those webbed feet, similar to the duck that's found in the water, is going to be really important for this bird being able to dive deep down into open water on the coast and catch fish. Now, we also talked about how birds can have air in their bones that can make them light. Well, he is more similar to us, where he has solid bones and he has really heavy bones. And that's because he wants to be heavy and have extra weight so that when he is diving into the water, he has extra weight to pull him down and make him better at getting deeper into the water. And then if you look really closely, he has blue eyes, those kind of aqua blue eyes that are really pretty. And they actually have really good eyesight for being able to see the fish when they're hunting in the water. And then lastly, what I want you to notice is that he has his wings spread out. So it might look like he's ready to fly, but he actually has his wings spread out for a different reason. And that's because I was also talking about the ducks that will have waterproof wings that are gonna, shed water off. He does not have that. The cormorants do not have that. They actually want to absorb water in their feathers because, again, that will make them heavier and that will help them dive into the water. And so having those heavier feathers that are soaked in water will help him dive. So what he's doing is he actually has his wings spread out so that he can dry off. He is drying himself off by spreading his wings. So really cool bird. And then we have our ostriches. So this bird cannot be found here in the United States. They are found in Africa. So they are found in drier habitat, sort of like desert-like or really dry habitat, which you can kind of see from this picture. But they're also a really big bird. And so while they do have wings and they do have feathers that you can see here on these birds, they also do not fly. So we've been talking a lot about wings being really important for flight and birds flying into the air. But the ostrich here does not fly. Instead, they use those really long and powerful legs that you can see to run. So they can run up to 40 miles an hour, which is super fast if they are trying to sprint. And they can even move up to 30 miles an hour for longer periods of time. So why do they have feathers and wings then? What's the point of having them if they're not going to fly anyway? They can actually, because they run on land and they're so fast, they can actually use those wings to balance themselves out while they're running on the ground. So I don't know if you've ever tried to walk on a rope or anything like that, but what do? Or even if we put our arms out, we kind of use our arms to balance ourselves. Well, these ostriches will do the same thing. They will use them to balance themselves when they're running really fast. And what's kind of cool too is that they only have 2 toes compared to other birds that will have at least 3. They're the only bird that has 2 toes, and that's because it helps them kick off the ground really well and run a lot faster. And I mentioned I would come back to this super big egg. So this is an ostrich egg. It is the largest egg laid by an animal on land these days, which is really cool. They can be up to 3 pounds, which is pretty heavy. And to kind of put that and to compare that to other eggs, if you think about a chicken egg, right, that we eat or that we have at home, just normal eggs, that's this one egg is equal in weight to 24 of those chicken eggs that we have that are much smaller, right? So pretty cool. These eggs, just like other eggs, are laid on the ground and they have the same features, but really cool. I figured I'd mention it since this is the biggest egg we have. All right. So those ostriches are really cool. They're found in Africa. They're really fast, and they're a cool bird. Okay, so they're a bird found in a hot environment. I figured we'd switch gears a little bit and talk about a bird that's found in a really cold environment. Does anybody know what this is? So yes, this is a penguin. This is an emperor penguin. They are found in Antarctica, which can get very cold. And again, I'm switching it up and I'm talking about a bird that doesn't fly. So penguins, similar to that cormorant, or right here that I was talking about, that's really good at diving into the water. These penguins are even much better divers, so they can go a lot deeper than the cormorants. They can dive really, really deep down into that really cold water in the Arctic. And they can even stay underwater for up to 20 minutes when they're trying to find food and catch fish. So they will also try to catch fish. But what's even more important than that, which is really impressive that they can hunt, they do slide on their bellies when they're trying to move around really fast. But they also, you can see they're covered in feathers, but they look really small, right? But that's what's really important. They want a lot of feathers packed together really tight and small so that they can stay nice and warm. So they don't need big flight feathers like some of these other feathers that we're looking at. They'd rather have a lot of really small feathers packed together so they can stay nice and warm where it's really cold. And then what else penguins will do to keep warm, which I think is kind of fun, is they will huddle together. And they can be found in groups of up to 5,000 to 10,000 birds in a huddle, and they all pack together nice and tight so that they can stay warm, especially when it gets really cold in the winter. And what's fun is they will all do a little bit of a penguin march and rotation so that they can switch out who's found on the outside of that huddle or that group of penguins so that not one poor penguin has to be found on the outside the whole time where it's going to be the most cold, but he can or she can eventually work their way into the middle of the huddle and warm up a little bit more. And then all of the baby penguins are also going to be found in the very center where it's going to be the warmest to help protect them from those cold temperatures. So kind of something cool that they do out in the Arctic to help all keep themselves warm, and it's really nice. So very different, again, found in a much different environment than that ostrich. And with that, give me 1 second and I'm gonna grab one more bird that I'm gonna show everybody. All right. So this is Red. Red is an eastern screech owl. So this is an owl, and this is another kind of a bird. And this one's a bit different than all the other birds we've been talking about. So a lot of those birds I just showed you aren't necessarily relying on flying. They don't do a whole lot of flying. They'd rather dive into the water, or they'd rather run on land like that ostrich. But red here, this eastern screech owl, he really does like to fly, and he's very good at flying. And they actually do something really cool when they're flying, which is they're very quiet when they're flying. You almost can't even hear them. And that's because they have really special feathers. So this is an owl wing. This is a lot bigger than what would be found on red, because red is a really small owl. So this is a full-grown owl, the eastern screech owl. But what I wanted to show you is what's found on their wings, which is really special, is at the very tip or edge of the wings, you can kind of tell there's comb-like feathers. And so that helps break up the noise when they're flying, and it keeps them nice and quiet. And then, like I was mentioning, a lot of owls will have color patterns that allow them to hide in trees. So red is very good at blending in with trees and hiding. And then if you look really closely, what you might notice is that red also has some of those talons that I was talking about earlier that can be really good at grabbing and catching on to food. So they're pretty good hunters. They will hunt at night, which is pretty cool, where they can catch things like mice. But a really cool animal. They can be found here in Georgia, but they're going to be hard to see, again, because they're so small, and because they do blend in with trees really well, and because they're quiet when they fly. And also because they come out at night. So for all of those reasons, it's going to be difficult to find one of these birds out in the wild, but they're really cool nonetheless. And then the last thing I wanted to show you, which he's using right now, is that if you look really closely, you can see his beak, and that's much different than the other beaks I was showing you earlier, right? So I showed you one that's good for eating seeds, one that's good, the long beak that's good for picking food out of the ground and out of the water, and then the duck bill or beak that's really flat. But if you notice here, is red has kind of a curved and a really small but a really sharp beak. And so what he does is kind of what he's doing right now, is he's going to use it to tear apart meat. So all the other bird beaks that we talked about, you can see it, you can kind of see it there curved down. Oh, that's a good view. So you can see how narrow and sharp it is, but that's going to be good for picking apart meat. So that's a different food source, and that's because red is more of a hunter, which is why he has both that sharp beak for pulling apart meat and eating things like that, and he also has feet that are a little bit more similar to this, with those really sharp talons. So really cool bird, and that's about all I had for you today. So does anybody have any questions about red, or any of the characteristics of birds, or any of the different birds we talked about? Let me check here. So I don't see any questions, but I hope you all really enjoyed this talk, and I hope you all learned a lot, and we can't wait to see you again for more talks, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Take care, everybody.